We have here America 1, and we have here America 2. Let me explain the primary difference between the two of them. This was what we call a constitutional republic. All laws were based upon the Constitution of the United States. In 1913, the Constitution was flawed to such an extreme event that it made it a completely different country. You could no longer keep all the money you made, and you could no longer pass property on to your children and so forth, okay? It was an entirely different country, and it became what we call a legislative democracy. The legislative democracy today runs side by side with the constitutional republic, and you can choose, they're both, incidentally, just out of pure coincidence, called America. They're both called the United States, you see, because the idea is to fool us, but they are different countries. And they exist side by side today, okay? Now, you can still live in America 1, but you have to know how, and that's what the rest of our seminar is about. Is this fun or what? Okay? This is like our return to our roots. Okay, now, you see, because this is going to strip everything away. The primary book up here was the Constitution of the United States, actually based with the Declaration of Independence, where we are created, and of course endowed by our Creator with these unalienable rights. Notice it wasn't inalienable rights. The inalienable has a different, these were unalienable. Nobody could put a lien on it. The government, it says governments were instituted among men to secure these rights. Now, notice what's happening down here. The government is putting the liens on. Up here, their job is to keep the liens off, so nobody can lien your property. You can still live here. There's ways to do it. Okay? I mean, this is great stuff. The people that you read about, well, actually, the people you don't read about, the super rich, we get this garbage in the newspaper, but every year, the richest guy in the world is some guy that owns a drugstore or some guy that owns a department store. I mean, come on. Where's the guys with the banks and the oils? Okay, they're up here. How come they aren't listed as the richest men in the world? Well, because we're going to show you they have been able to own this property or control this property without owning it. See, Rockefeller really doesn't own Standard Oil, he just controls it. The Rothschild Bank of England really doesn't own our Federal Reserve System, it just controls it. Hey, is that great or what? See, if you control it, there's no tax on control, there's only a tax on ownership. Got it? But the guys with the drugstores and so forth, well, they are really making a lot of money, according to the Wall Street Journal. But all the guys with the really heavy bucks are always missing from these charts. Okay, amazing what we learn when we get out of school. Let's go back into some history now and figure out what happened, what caused all this. Because if we don't understand the past, we don't understand the present. Isn't this interesting? All right. So I want to go back to, our Garden of Eden scene again. Of course, then we had a flood, and the flood went away, and people started a thing called the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel was where some guy made a record and called it, "I'll Do It My Way." And so they had to speak different languages, go different parts of the country, okay? Yeah, different parts of the world, okay? Now, around the Mediterranean, what we call the Western world, sprang up some world governments of sorts. The first major world government that we hear about is Egypt. And this is all, of course, in the Old Testament of the Bible. There were your pharaohs. Egypt was a very interesting country because the guy at the top considered himself to be God. This may surprise you. See, people in government always like that title. It comes with the job, it seems. Yes, they really enjoy that. All right? So, you see, and so to do anything against this guy was considered blasphemy. Well, you can't beat that. Any kind of revolution was a rebellion against God, you see. And they worshipped the sun, and they had temples that they met in, and they had temple priestesses and temple prostitutes and temple this and temple that, and they had all this, these strange things that they worship, like the, different phenomenon, okay, like frogs and so forth that they worshipped in Egypt. Well, Egypt was eventually conquered by a country called Assyria. Assyria was, sort of up where Iran, Iraq are today in that area. And they conquered Egypt. Now, the guy who ran Assyria, this may come as a shock, considered himself to be God. See, notice the name and the location changes, but the title remains the same. Okay? And they had a temple thing, and they had sun worship, and you see, it's kind of like the same thing. Well, this goes on for a few years, And then there were some guys from Babylon, which was down further south from Assyria. Babylon, and they conquered Assyria. Isn't that interesting? Now, in Babylon, the king up there, well, for some reason, thought he was God. You see, same deal. They had temples, and they had these rituals. They worshiped the sun, and da-da-da-da. Okay, ready? Okay, another world empire comes along, conquers this Babylon. This is the Medo-Persian. The Median tribes up in the north, were basically you're up around the Baltic Sea up in there. And then you had the Persians, Medo-Persian, okay, which is where Iran is today. Okay? Now, the thing that characterized this guy was that he thought he was God. See how this changes from time to time? Okay? So we have God, 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 God. Got it? See, history isn't that hard to remember. Okay? Now, okay, and things went along pretty well until he was conquered by Greece. Alexander the Great conquered this. Alexander the Great was an interesting guy. One item of note about him was that he thought he was God. Okay? And they had he worshipped the sun and a few things, and they had little temple prostitutes, temple priests, and so forth, and pretty much the same thing. And then he was conquered by Rome. Isn't that interesting? And the Roman Caesars had this little trait that they like to have people call him, you know. It went something like God. See? So the guy who runs government always thinks he's God. This is not something that the IRS just created recently. This has been going on for some time. See, if we don't understand history, we don't understand the National Enquirer, okay? As we go through Safeway, our trip is meaningless. Okay, now, so what happens? Okay, so we find here that in order to be able to understand this, we have to have a grasp on what's been going on before we got here, okay? Now we're ready to understand ourselves. All right, now, let's erase this again. This is going to be fun. Ta-da! This is getting easier. Oh, that lubricated. I guess there was no lubrication under or something. Okay. There we go. All right, now, so if we took this another way, we say from 3,000 years BC, okay, for the first 3,000 years until the time of Christ, we have a government that was primarily involved with external control, don't we? External control. Even the old Hebrew religion, if you want to know what to do, well, some guy went up to the mountain and he got some tablets, and he brought these tablets back and said, guys, here's what we're going to do. Notice it was not a democratic meeting, because they would have come up with the golden calf if they did it, wouldn't they? Okay, but he came up with these tablets, you see, and said, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and all these things. Well, hey, that's not what we want to do, is it? See, that was external. That was external stuff, see? And he says, if you do this stuff, you're going to die. Okay. So, guys have been trying it ever since. Okay, now, so what happens, okay? And so what causes a lot of death, okay? Okay, you see, this doesn't come from what the guy wants to do. It comes from an external source. The guy at the top had this little attribute. He was always right, because he was God. Now, you can't beat that for authority. That's as good as it gets. Okay, now, okay, along comes our friend Christ now. Interesting guy. And his name was Emmanuel. Does anybody know what Emmanuel meant in Hebrew? God with us. God is with us. See, God isn't afar. God isn't out there. God is with us. See? And he comes along now. He preaches the gospel of the kingdom. This is really interesting. And where did he say this kingdom was? Anybody have any idea? Well, he said his kingdom was within us, didn't he? And right, it wasn't of this earth. It was within us. See, and so John explains that. He comes along and he says, well, greater is he who's within you than he who's in the world. Can anybody see a conflict arising here? Do you know what they did with this guy? Ooh, not good. Kimosabe, not good. You notice what he did? He introduced the concept of internal control, didn't he? Oh boy, problems. Problems. Isn't that interesting? Now, what we're going to show you for the next half an hour, and how much time do we have till the break here, Guy? Well, what time did we start?
Started at 9.
Okay, so we've been going Okay, so let's go for about an hour and take a break, and then we'll come back for another hour and take another break, and then we'll come back, and then there will be no break after that. No, I'm kidding. Now, okay, so, all right, nobody will come back after that. Now, see, because I submit to you that if we understand this, we'll understand, like, what's going on with our paychecks. Okay, so for the next 15 minutes, and then we'll have a break, I want to talk about what was the effect of internal control on the world. Because there was some effect. If you look at a map, and I'm not a good cartologist here, but anyway, what you have is the Mediterranean Ocean, something like this, and you got Africa, and you have Arabia Peninsula, and you got India over here, and you've got Europe and Scandinavia coming over here like this, and you've got England over here, all right? Now, there you've got what's called the Caucasus Mountains. Now, out of this melting pot, if you will, or the beginning of civilization, we find there were two flows. One flow went this way, and one flow went this way, both of them ending up in England. England is our pivot point here in history. It's interesting, okay? Now, what you're going to find is that these people had internal motivation. Okay, these people became what we know as your Caucasians. They became known as the Anglo-Saxons. There's all kinds of names for them. They went into Germany where they became the Teutons. They went into Scandinavia where they became the Vandals and eventually the Vikings. They had one characteristic that was impeccable. They were never conquered by anybody. Nobody messed with them. They were not very civilized, but nobody had any trouble with them, okay? Because they just didn't kill you, just look at you. Yeah, yeah, that's you. That's roots. Okay, you see, but the internal thing was like on. And they would have raids on England, they'd have raids on all these places. They come out of the forge, you know, and they had this god called Odin. Well, it's interesting, we won't get into all that, but he ran the bank and a few things. Okay, now, along here, we have basically our Latin-type people, okay, which is Greece, Italy, France, Spain, and so forth. Now, the characteristic of this group of people was external control. Matter of fact, they went into France, and today we find Ireland is populated by your people from France, whereas Scotland is populated by people from Scandinavia, basically, okay? So you find a big difference in the people. You'll find a big difference in their governments. You'll find a big difference in how they relate to things as a culture. Now, if a person leaves and goes to another culture, then he will change. It's not a racial characteristic, it is a cultural characteristic. But this seems to be inherent in the culture for some reason, all right? Along here was the Roman Catholic Church, for example. They would burn you if you read the Bible. You didn't read the Bible. And matter of fact, well, we're going to find here some interesting things. The Tyndale actually read the Bible in English in 1377. He was burned at the stake because he stole the church property. Yeah. I mean, see, what did that do to the church? Well, if you could read the Bible, you wouldn't need their external control, would you? See the difference, okay? So we're going to see that all the way down, this has conflicted with government, whether it's church government or civil government. There's been this tremendous conflict now between internal and external control. America I was internal control. America II from 1913 is external control imposed on us. Did anybody voluntarily pay his income tax last year? No, it was stolen from you, wasn't it? It was stolen. You couldn't even get it back. See, it was external. You didn't decide that. Somebody else decided it. But see, that wasn't existing in America I. When we understand this, we'll come out of here with a great power that we didn't have when we walked in here. You quit work, yeah. Well, the secret is you quit working for someone else. Now you want to work for yourself because you get to keep it if you work for yourself. See the difference? Okay. So what happens over here is that this culminates in what we call the feudal system. Over in England, we had a king. Now, king means sovereign in Latin, the term Caesar. Okay, it means the guy who owns the place, the guy who owns the land. The guy who owns the land usually has all the power and all the wealth. It's not very simple. The power is in the land, as far as economics are concerned. Okay, in German, that's called Kaiser. In Russian, it's called Tsar. In English, it's called king. It's the same word. It comes from the Latin word sovereign, or Caesar.